Hello friends, and welcome back to the mothership. Today we are smoking up this hot and fast pulled pork. Let's get started. Here is a pork butt. This is about 8.5 pounds, which is about the size that I usually find. So it'll be a good test for this experiment here. Just gonna get our average cryovac and see what we're working with. Now, just like most pork butts, I'm gonna do minimal amount of trimming on this. Usually I feel they don't need it. When you pull it, you can kind of take out anything that you don't want, but maybe a little bit of this fat that I don't plan on eating even when it's done. I could really get in there and pull out some more of this. This side's actually got a pretty decent fat cap on it, which is nice, but I don't think I need that much, so let's pull a little bit of it off. Now, a lot of people just leave the fat cap completely on, and I've been known to do that in the past too. But if your plan is to have a nice bark on here, but you also plan to just rip off the fat cap when you are pulling it, then I don't really see the point of keeping the fat cap on. You want to get as much of that bark onto the meat as possible, right? Because that's what you want to eat. So trim off a bit. Don't take all of it. It does protect the meat from drying out to a certain extent. It's not really necessary to have on here though. So I'm going to pull it down pretty low. Now, just like all my cooks, first thing I want to do here is get some salt on. So about 8.5 pounds. I usually do about half teaspoon per pound. So I'm going to give this about 4¼ teaspoons. A little more, a little less, depending on how much salt you actually want on your food. But that's where I always start with, and I think it's a good starting point. Now, this is a big cut of meat, guys, so it can take a bunch of salt. Now, with it nice and salted, I'm just going to let it sit in the fridge while the salt is absorbed in the meat, and then I'm going to get the rest of my rub together. Now, I'm going with an Asian-style rub today, so I'm going to start off with some sugar, some cumin, some paprika, some chili powder, black pepper, garlic powder, and Chinese 5-spice. I'm going to get this all mixed together and go into a shaker bottle. With all of our salt nice and absorbed, it's time to get this rubbed down. There is no salt in here because it's in the meat, as you just saw, so we can kind of go ham and completely cover this big old slab of meat with our rub. Now that looks pretty darn good to me. At this point, you should go back into the fridge, let everything kind of come together, meld on there a bit. And when you want to actually start smoking, we are going to get our smoker up to about 300, 325, and that's where we're going to run it. Usually I start these out at about 180 to get as much smoke on there as I can. And then usually bump the temperature up once I wrap it. But in this case, we are going to go straight on at 300, 325 and run it all the way through and see what comes out on the other side. It is freezing cold out here, but our meat is coming along nicely. It's been on for about an hour and a half. The bark is definitely set, and we're running about 115 internal. At this point, I'm going to begin spritzing it down. Just because we're running at such high heat, I'm going to start spritzing early here because I don't want it to dry out. But our bark has set, so we should be okay. So I'm just using my usual apple cider, the hard stuff. And I'm going to keep doing that about every half an hour to an hour or when it looks dry. But it's freezing. I'm going to go inside, and I'm going to let this thing keep running. 6 hours in, and this is probing like butter all over. I think we're pretty much done, guys. So what I'm going to do is this is going to get pulled. I'm going to just wrap it and let it rest for maybe about an hour. I just want to let everything come back together, and then we will pull it. But I'm pretty sure this bone is going to come out with zero effort, and I'm interested to see how this compares to my standard low and slow. Let's get it out of here. Let's get it wrapped up. While we wait, if you're interested, follow along with the barbecue sauce I'm going to use tonight. I'm making an Asian style one. To do so, I am going to start with some soy sauce, a bunch of brown sugar, some honey, some hoisin sauce, some rice wine vinegar, some sesame oil, some 5-spice powder, some garlic powder, and some ginger. If you have oyster sauce, I'd probably add some in here, and I'll include that in the recipe down below as optional, but that adds a little bit of extra flavor here. And then all we want to do is get this onto the stove on some low heat and let it start reducing a bit. It's still pretty liquidy, and if we want it to be more like a barbecue sauce, we definitely want a little bit more thickness. So onto the stove it goes and let it reduce. This pork has had a nice rest in this tin foil, and now it's time to pull it and see how it looks. So here is our bone. Comes out pretty easily. Can't complain. The one thing I am going to notice right off the bat is there's definitely a decent amount of char on here. This is mostly on the underside, which isn't too big of a deal. I think that's more of a case of me not wrapping it, but more so just going unwrapped the entire way. But as far as the quality of the meat, I mean, it is super tender, just falls apart. This is kind of what you're looking for when you're looking for pulled pork. But I can tell that there is a very, very minimal smoke ring on here. Probably the big reason that I always push for low and slow, specifically on pellet smokers, is because the amount of smoke you're going to get at higher temperatures versus lower temperatures is very different. If you're running an offset, you can get a really good smoke ring at pretty much all temperatures. But in general, your lower temperatures are what produces the most amount of smoke. And when you're working with a pellet smoker, which already has less of a smoke output than your traditional stick burner, you're going to get less smoke. So if you're looking for that good smoke ring, unfortunately, running it at a higher temperature is not going to do it for you. So if you look here, I mean, you can see some smoke, a little bit of smoke ring there, but not much. It's definitely less than I get usually on my machine, and I'm attributing that 100% to the fact that I ran this at, 325, 350 versus 180, which is where I usually try and build most of my bark at. As far as yield, this doesn't look too much different than what I usually get. I'm assuming I'm not losing more or less based on temperature. I think this is probably going to give me the same amount that I usually get with an 8.5 pork butt. But what matters, obviously, is how it tastes. So we may as well give it a taste test and see how we did. Now this test between hot and fast and low and slow is something I've wanted to do for a while now. Smoke output, heat, efficiency, all that is really good when you're doing very low. As you start to come up in temperature, the efficiency remains the same, but unfortunately the amount of smoke that's produced from those pellets is much lower than you get with actual sticks or even charcoal. So if you're running an offset, running low and slow works really well. Running hot and fast, you'll probably get pretty darn good results as well. But I was really curious, what would happen on a pellet smoker if I run hot and fast? Am I gonna get the same quality food that I can pull off my machine outside? Now, as far as just looking at it and when I did the pulling apart, I could tell that the smoke flavor we're gonna get off this is probably gonna be much less than I usually get running at 180, 225, that area. But the pulled pork itself, the consistency looks really good. The flavor, it's gonna be fantastic. I mean, that's mostly just the rub. The bark, it looks really good on the top side. On the bottom side, that's more exposed to the heat. It really did burn a lot there, running over 300 degrees. I probably could have flipped this over and over or just wrapped it. That might have alleviated some of my issues. And at home, you might be thinking what I should have done when I was running this hot and fast, I should have taken a smoker tube, filled up with pellets, and burned them inside of my pit while I was smoking at a higher temperature. That would have given me extra smoke and maybe alleviated some of the issues I'm getting with the lack of smoke here. I knew from the start that I probably could have gone that route, but instead of doing that, I wanted to check to see how it would work without using it first. Maybe in the future I'll try it with a smoke tube. Most importantly, it's time to get a taste test and see how this is gonna taste. It looks fantastic. I'm sure it's gonna be great. And we've got some Asian style barbecue that I'm going to add on here. If you're wondering how we're actually gonna eat this pulled pork tonight, I'm making some bao buns. I've got some pickled radishes and carrots, and it's gonna be pretty fantastic. If you guys are curious, ask down below and I can provide the recipe for both of those as well. But most importantly, let's see how it tastes. I'm gonna try it without any of the sauce first. I mean, it's pulled pork, guys. I got a little bit of the bark. That Asian rub is really, really good. There's definitely not much smoke flavor on here at all. Now let's get a little bit of this barbecue sauce on there, and let's see how it's gonna taste with the full Asian vibe going here. Now, we love Asian food here, and we love pulled pork, we love barbecue. Melding the two together is always one of my favorite things. This is a really good barbecue sauce. I used it in my char siu recipe that you might have seen in an earlier video. Pulled pork is always great. This rub is really fantastic, and I'm probably gonna use it more in the future. I'm definitely gonna recreate this entire recipe using my usual low and slow method and see with the extra smoke how that would come out. I think the takeaway here, guys, if you are pressed for time, you just didn't calculate things right, or just weren't paying attention and the days kind of caught up with you, and you have a big pork butt to do, you could absolutely get this done in like 6 hours, which is what I did. 8.5 pound pork butt, 6 hours. Fantastic consistency. You don't have as much smoke, but it came out really, really good. Everyone's gonna love this unless they're huge smoke fans. I think if you have the time and you can plan it well, you should absolutely be cooking at like 200, 225. Get that low and slow out there on your pellet smoker. and only reserve this method for those small occasions where you just let it get away from you. Let me know down below if you think differently, guys. Let me know what you guys are cooking, and most importantly, stick around for the next cook, guys, and I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.